Luke 6:43, it says, "For a good tree brings not forth corrupt fruit, neither does a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. For every tree is known by his own fruit. For of thorns men do not gather figs, nor of bramble bush gather they grapes." Now, verse 45, this is going to be the main focus. He says, "A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth that which is good. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks." And one more verse, just to tack this on for an additional teaching. Not that we don't have enough to think about already, but this does appropriately extend the teaching of the Christ here. Verse 46, he says, "And why call you me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say?" Which is interesting, because he was just talking about the words that proceed forth from the mouth, and then he just had a critical thought or a critical teaching on having words proceed out of your mouth and not acting upon those words, not behaving in accordance with those words. And so there's plenty to think about right here. The first thing I want to do is make sure that we take teachings like this and remember that we need to always try to learn what we can from what Jesus says. We can not only be able to examine other people, but we also must search our own hearts, our own words while we read this. We have been talking about the subject of judging just recently in the last couple of Sundays, and the importance of being able to be highly trained in the realm of properly judging. And this is going to be one of the ways that we are able to judge, is being able to see the fruits, see the way people engage with their own words that proceed from their own mouth. So there's some similarities. Here's the thing here. There's two kinds of people, two classifications that Jesus brings to the table here in verse 45. He says that there's the good man and there is the evil man. And there's a relationship between the two. There's similarities. Both of them have a heart, and both of them do whatever is in their heart, or speak whatever is in their heart. But then, of course, it depends on what is in the heart. And then he brings the teaching to its main point to help us understand what will determine what we do, what we say, the fruits that come about. So the end of the verse 45, he says, "For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks." So, you imagine it like this. The heart is even though it's a complex, metaphorical organ of the spiritual body. Very difficult to understand. Very difficult to define. Something that no human can really actually comprehend. There's a statement made by the prophet Jeremiah in Jeremiah 17. He said, "The heart is deceitful above all things." Now, keep in mind, it's not just deceitful, it's just more deceitful than anything else. Which is the whole reason why we need the teachings of the good word. That's the whole reason why such a big portion of our service is dedicated to the good word. That's the reason why pretty much every Sunday I tell you, get in the word, be in the word, because you cannot trust the thoughts of your own heart. We have conclusions, we have feelings, we have emotions, we have all this stuff that comes from the heart. We have thoughts. You can't trust any of that, so that's why we need to have an external source to be able to consume and put inside of the heart. Now, this heart, this spiritual organ that we have, is being described by Jesus as a storage unit. It's a storehouse. And we could pretty much conclude that everything that we attend to, everything that we see, everything that we hear, even smell and all those kinds of things. You ever smell something that reminds you of, let's talk about a good memory. Reminds you of grandma's cooking. You know what I mean? Or like a smell of a flower or something that reminded you of your childhood, going back. The smells do that to us. So everything that's in the heart is coming as a result of some type of intake, some type of sensory processing. And that's one of the reasons why the world that we're living in, why there's so many warnings, and why so much of preaching, and not just mine, but so much of preaching now, is dedicated to the regulation of consumption of smartphone technology and social media, because that is a type of consumption. We're bombarded with all this, and all that stuff goes somewhere. Okay? And the heart is storing it up. So we have to figure out, we have to put a lot of thinking into not just the intake, but how we even organize and arrange the intake. I'm going to take you now just a chapter over to the book of Luke chapter 8. And notice another agricultural teaching of the Christ, the parable of the sower. Jesus divides up the classification of humanity into 5 categories. Sorry, 4 categories. I was looking at verse 5. Verse 5 is where we're going to start reading. 4 categories, starting in verse 5, Jesus says, "A sower went forth to sow his seed. And as he sowed, some fell upon the wayside, and it was trodden down, and the fowls of the air devoured it. And some fell upon a rock, and as soon as it was sprung up, it withered away, because it lacked moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it, and choked it. And other fell on good ground, and sprang up, and bare fruit 100-fold. And when he had said these things, he cried, 'He that has ears to hear, let him hear.'" Now he gives an explanation of this. I do want to draw your attention now to verse 15 to get us started on interpreting this parable. This is in his explanation of the parable, which is nice that he did it because Jesus gives a commentary on his own parable. He doesn't always do that. But verse 15, he says, "But on the good ground are they which in an honest and good heart." Now, I'll just pause right there just for a moment, because if you recall when we were talking about the good tree, there's the good man with the good treasure that's in his heart. So there's a lot of emphasis being placed upon the quality of the individual. This is huge. This is a big deal. Now, this is something that each and every individual has to take very seriously. The quality of the individual, the quality of the heart depends upon the individual and how the individual is giving heed to these words. He cried after teaching, and that's what the King James says, and this is the end of verse 8, referring back to what we just read. After giving the parable, just the overall parable, he speaks in verse 8, and when he said these things, he cried, "He that has ears to hear, let him hear." The reason why I'm highlighting that for you right now is because the point for Luke to even record the words that he cried is to help you and me understand that he is emphasizing that point right there. He that has ears to hear, let him hear. Let this sink. I love our brother Jerry, who will be here this evening. I love one of the things he says in his prayers from time to time. You know what he says? After a lesson and he gives a closing prayer, he will say, asking God for help to let these things sink deep into our ears and into our hearts. And I like that deep, because that depth is about the root getting deep down inside the heart to where it becomes instinctual. It becomes a part of you. You start speaking the word without even realizing that you're doing it. It has to become a part of who you are. And this isn't the kind of thing that should be only coming up when you're around the right people. It must be who you are. It must be an identity. If you are a Christian, you wear the name Christ. And you may have a last name. I'm the son of George Matlock. Matlock is my last name, but I tell you what, I'm not going to be referring to Matlock on the judgment day. I'm going to be referring to the Christ. There's only one person who's going to get me through those gates, those pearly gates, and it's the name Christ, and that is who I should be all the time. And it depends upon the soil, making sure that there's a deep root of that word. And so you need to be consuming this sin, eating it, breathing it, drinking it, feeling it, thinking it, having it always a part of who you are. When you sit down and wait, because that's something we have to do from time to time, just start wondering and piecing together little pieces of the word, start memorizing it and letting it become even more a part of who you are. Go with me over to the book of Proverbs chapter 24. As we keep this idea of the 4 different soils in our mind, Proverbs chapter 24, the wise man wrote these words. One of my things that I like about Solomon is how he will write about his observations. He'll say, I was taking a walk one day and I noticed this thing. And that's what he does here. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 24, beginning in verse 30, it says, I went by the field. You see what I'm saying? About, he's like going on a walk. And Jesus did the same thing. If you go like to the book of John, chapter 15, they're on their way to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus notices like some vines. And he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. And it's like he's on a walk and he's just pointing to things. That's the way we should be thinking. You see what I'm saying? Like as you go on the walk, you see the flowers. What do you see? You see creation. You see the beauty of God. When you see people behaving in certain ways, when you see darkness coming to pass, that's what we were talking about in the Bible class this morning, darkness, remembering the darkness, even though it's good to rejoice and it's good to see the good things, don't forget darkness. Whenever you see the darkness, remember that you've been told through the word that darkness is going to be in the world. And the darkness will not like the light. Well, here we are in Proverbs chapter 24, and he does the same thing. He goes by the field and he notices something. So verse 30. I went by the field of the slothful, and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it was all grown over with thorns and nettles, had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. Now, you might be tempted to be thinking about your neighbor right now. Like, man, I wish he would take care of his lawn, you know. Something like, drive down some neighborhoods and you have that thought. I hesitate to read this because I have too many weeds in my front yard right now. Yeah, I don't. But We need to be thinking about the heart right now. Now, it is useful. I mean, it's something that Jesus did. He used lots of imagery to teach. David used imagery to teach. And the reason why is because God created the heavens and the earth. Like everything that he made has a spiritual lesson behind it. It's really cool. It's beautiful. And what we have here is the original curse. Go back to Adam and Eve when everything was nice. There was no issues. There was no sin. And as soon as they ate of the forbidden tree, God banished them from the garden, and he says to the man, from the sweat of your brow. And from that moment forth, the thorns and the thistles started coming about. Now, that's just a layer of the real problem. The real thorns and the real thistles is all this stuff. All the clutter, all the contamination in the heart. And he talks about the man who is slothful and void of understanding. There's no time to be slothful. It's always time to reflect and think and start cultivating the heart. This is huge and this is real. There's always time to be cultivating the heart. If your heart is not in good shape, it's your own fault. Go back to Proverbs chapter 9. This is the stuff that I wish they would teach in the schools. This is the stuff that I wish more parents would teach to their children. But I want you, before you leave here, even though you may already know this, but I'm just going to obnoxiously remind you that you must be tending to your own heart. You must be cultivating your own field, and it's something that you can never take for granted. And there's some statements here in the book of Proverbs chapter 9. If you take a look at verse 7, this statement is made. He that reproves a scorner gets to himself shame, and he that rebukes a wicked man gets himself a blot. Verse 8, he says, reprove not a scorner, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. You see, I can make a general statement right now and say nobody likes to be corrected. It'd be generally a true statement. But you need to cultivate yourself and exercise your own mind and your own will and your own heart to be the person who actually hears instruction and hears rebuke and hears correction and actually loves the person who corrects you and helps you. Rebuke a wise man and he will love you for it. Verse 9, it says, give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. That's like what Jesus said, but to him that has, to him shall more be given. To him that has not, even that he seems to have, shall be taken away. We talk that way because there's this intangible thing about people. You know, when you get along with somebody and you're having a conversation with somebody and you connect well with somebody, your thought about that person was, well, they get it. You know, and that's about sometimes the extent of how we describe it. You know, some people just get it and some people don't. Well, don't be the person who doesn't get it. You see what I'm saying? Like, don't be the person who's not aware and not working and cultivating. Verse 10, he continues. We're in Proverbs 9, verse 10. He says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding." All this that I'm talking about right now, everything that Jesus taught and how it overlaps with what we're talking about over here in the book of Proverbs, this is all about the foundational principle, and that is respect, reverence, fear of God. Because all we're doing right now, all that I'm talking about when it comes to our responsibility, is us having the humility to let the Spirit of God do the work that the Spirit of God has to do within us. Because the Spirit is the Word, and the Word is the seed, which is the parable. In the parable of the sower, he was spreading out the seed, and in some kinds of soil, it didn't do much. The seed is the Word of God. And then he says in verse 11, "For by me your days shall be multiplied, and your years, the years of your life shall be increased." And now verse 12. This is my go-to verse whenever I think of the idea of personal responsibility. Proverbs 9 and verse 12. "If you will be wise, you shall be wise for yourself. But if you scorn, you alone shall bear it." I think the loneliest moment for any human in the grand panorama of their existence may be the judgment day. Because on the judgment day, you can't act like Adam and say, "Yeah, but the woman you gave me." "You who scorn shall bear it alone." "If you will be wise, you shall be wise for yourself." And we humans are full of excuses. The reasons why we're not doing the things that we know we ought to be doing. But there's personal responsibility, and it's about cultivation, and it's about storing the proper things within the heart, letting the proper seeds take their root. Because whatever is happening, whatever is coming out, whatever is oozing out of us is as a result of the treasure that's in the heart. Now remember, I'm going back to the origin of the lesson. That's what Jesus said. He said, "The good man out of the good treasure of his heart does good things," or says good things. "And the evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart does evil things. According to the abundance that is in his heart," that's what he does. That's what he says. So I'm going to take you now over to the book of Romans, chapter 12 and verse 2. Romans 12 and verse 2. We're told by the Apostle Paul this statement, and when we connect this with where we just were, we were in Proverbs, and he's talking about the wall being broken down and the thorns and the thistles, and we brought forth the idea of the personal responsibility in Proverbs chapter 9. Now I want to bring it into the more spiritual application, the way it's brought forth by the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. Now, if you take a look at verse 1, he says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service." So that's talking about commitment. But now in verse 2, he's going to talk about what I truly believe is going to be one of the major lessons that you walk away with today. And please memorize verses like this. "I beseech you, therefore, brethren," that you memorize this verse. Verse 2, and be not conformed to this world. Remember what I just said about don't be like Adam and say, well, because of what's happening in the world, because of the pressures, because of the woman you gave me, because of that wily serpent that was slithering around. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Okay, take note of the fact that Paul is addressing Christians in this writing. He's not talking to some new audience. It's not like the day of Pentecost when Peter was preaching to a whole bunch of Jews who didn't know Christ. He's talking to Christians. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. You know what he's saying there? Cultivate. Tend to the thorns, tend to the thistles, pull them out, get rid of them. So I'm going to take you to another layer of this idea of what's in the heart, because that's what we've been talking about much of the time, and organizing, searching it, and making it better and better, improving the quality of the soil. Now I'm going to take you to the book of Matthew, chapter 6. About the central location of the Sermon on the Mount. And read a few words from the words of the Christ as it is spoken on the Sermon on the Mount. Now, if we begin in verse 19, we'll see Jesus do something very similar to what he did in Luke chapter 6. And that works kind of nice, Luke 6 and Matthew chapter 6. He says in Matthew 6, verse 19, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. Okay. Remember now, the whole backbone of the lesson so far was talking about the treasure, the storehouse of the heart, what's in the heart. Now what Jesus is doing here is he is drawing a relationship, because his teaching is all unified. So what he said in Luke chapter 6 is going to connect perfectly with what he says in Matthew chapter 6. So he's talking about what's in the heart, and now he's talking about the relationship between the man, the human, the person, the woman, whoever. He's talking about the person and their relationship with things. And this is a teaching that Jesus does indeed bring forth. So, verse 19. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. The simplicity of the teachings of Jesus. There's nothing confusing about this. The only thing that's confusing is why so many of us don't listen to it. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? The only thing that's confusing is how, even though people can hear this, their entire life can still just totally miss it. He's talking about value. He's talking about the relationship with things. He's talking about your relationship with this existence. Verse 20, he continues. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, nor where thieves do not break through nor steal. Okay, now, he says in verse 21, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now, instead of the what is in the heart, what Jesus does here is he shifts it to where your heart is. We sang a song just earlier today, how beautiful heaven must be. Now, that song, the whole point of that song, and I've reached a point in my worship, my own personal experience in singing to the God of heaven. I reached the point, and this is what we should all be doing, trying to refine, cultivate. I reached the point to where, for some reason, when I sing the songs, I'm grasping more of what is we're actually singing, the actual words. And the whole singing aspect of it, that's something that God created, music and harmonics. That's a result of physics. That's just something that God made, and he created it that way, and it's really neat the way it all plays out. But that's just habit now, That's just something that you just do. You don't focus on the actual. You want to do as best you can, obviously. You don't want to sound like a parrot just for the sake of sounding like a parrot, obviously. Not that anyone here sounds like a parrot. But the words and the meaning, the poetry, the whole point of that is to get us to do what this lesson is even all about, to be able to have this and take it with you, and to always be able to have this melodious tune within the heart. And that song that we sang a moment ago fit just right with what I'm communicating to you right now, because I'm bringing your attention to this one statement, verse 21. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. It's not only just about what's in your heart, but where your heart is. And we sang about that, how beautiful heaven must be. Our goal, our purpose, isn't about what's happening down here. Our goal and our purpose is a mature understanding that this is all going to burn up one day, and no one's going to care about any of what's happening down here. That's the whole reason why Solomon would even say the words in Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What are you going to be concerned about on the day of judgment? You're going to be concerned about where your heart's been this whole time. And that's where peace comes from. That is the secret of peace. That is a secret of confidence. That's a secret of the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, goodness, meekness, faith, temperance. That's why nothing can faze somebody whose heart is in heaven, because I know that all things work together for good to them that are called according to God's purpose and them that love Him. Now go with me to Colossians chapter 3. I'm going to give you one last verse to confirm and enhance the idea behind the lesson here. Now remember, a tree whether it's good or evil, by its fruit. Jesus explains that lesson going back to Luke chapter 6, and he says that a good man does good based off of the treasure that's stored up within his heart. And from the abundance of the heart, a man speaks. That's what the words, that's the origin of the words. And then Jesus takes it a step further when he says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say?" Talking about the behavior matching the words. Now I want to highlight for you the importance and one of the applications of the form of worship, which is singing, and why singing is so important. Why it actually has the power and the capacity to change your whole world. It has the power to save. Singing has the power to save. Let's stop and think about that for a second. If you don't believe me, go to the book of Acts chapter 16 and read about Paul and Silas singing in prison. And then the Philippian jailer asking after the earthquake, "What do I do to be saved?" There's a reason why he knew what was going on. It says in Colossians 3 and verse 16, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord." And then he says, "And whatsoever you do in word or deed." Remember, Jesus said, "Why call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say?" Whatsoever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Can you imagine a more complete way of cultivating the soil? Let's stop and think about it now. One of the major points that I try to bring forth to you, to your ears today, was to keep track of what's in your heart and where your heart is. Can you think of a better way of doing that than to actually having woven into the heart, planted into the heart, rooted within the heart, doing whatever you do, in word or deed, all in the name of the Lord? Just stop and pause and think before you do something. Am I doing this in the name of the Lord? It's going to take a lot of discipline to do that. Because I have this strong feeling and honestly a strong conviction within myself right now. I can honestly tell you there are many things that I do throughout the week that I might be able to say, "I'm not sure if I'm doing this in the name of the Lord," because the son might look at me and say, that's not for my purpose. Or why did you say that? How many things do we say throughout the day that are not in the name of the Lord? We stop and think about this. This is the discipline of Christianity. This is being a disciple. To do everything in his name. To have his word dwelling richly, so much so that whatever you do, it's for him. Whatever you say, it's for him. So get working on it. And if you have not been baptized for the remission of your sins, come forth while we stand and sing.